Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be talking about the next installment of the ongoing series of one of my favorite comics of the mid-2000s, East of West #2. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in April of 2013, we see here that the second cover continues to use the same visual aesthetic and layout as the first cover did. And this is actually a thematical choice that the artist uses throughout the entirety of this series, where there is one consistent artistic cohesiveness that is seen on every single cover. If you buy the main cover, that is, of every single issue, which I actually thought was a cool choice. I like that, with the blank white on the bottom and the image on the top being monochromatic. Interestingly enough, I should point out that the image we see here on the top half of the cover is that of a story point that was not covered in the first issue and does not happen in this second issue either, which I find somewhat perplexing, but maybe also interesting that they would invoke imagery of something that is a plot point going forward. It just isn't a plot point that's been touched upon as of this issue. Jonathan Hickman, writer. Nick Dragata, artist. Frank Martin, colors. Russ Wooten, letters. We see here on the first page of the book a little blurb that basically is telling us this issue picks up exactly 12 hours after the end of issue number 1, where the world looks on to see who will succeed the currently murdered president in succession as leader of the Union going forward, and that all eyes of the world are on the White Tower. We're then teleported to the capital of the Union at the White Tower as the vice president of the Union, who is currently the acting president, believes that it is a foregone conclusion that he will be sworn in as president. Unfortunately for him, this opinion is not necessarily shared by 3 of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, being war, conquest, and famine, as they are surrounding him and questioning him about certain duties that the former president and allegiances that the former president had with them. The vice president states that, he's not one to believe in the message or the, ideals of the horsemen, and that he believes that it's basically all superstition and nonsense. However, he is quickly cut off by War, who states that, despite him not believing in any of it, it doesn't change the fact that the horsemen are standing right here in front of him. And they are a little disconcerted about where his allegiances may lie. Famine then suggests to the vice president that he should perhaps reconsider his allegiances and instead serve a higher power, to which the vice president responds that he will serve his conscience and nothing else. However, Conquest states that despite the fact that this has served him well up until this point, that his conscience is a coin that no longer has value, as we see that War is standing behind him, creating a, somewhat ethereal fire blade from a handle, as Conquest states that, it is impressive how far the vice president was able to come on serving his conscience and ignoring the words of the message, but alas, it's taken him as far as it can possibly go, as we see War strike with the sword and take off the head of the vice president. War then asks the other 2 horsemen who's next in line of succession, as we see that they slowly start to make their way through the cabinet of the president, with the secretary of the treasury and then the president of the Senate, and then the Secretary of War. And they then get to the Secretary of State, who begins to plead with the horsemen wanting to live, stating that he'll serve them, he'll do anything, he swears it. And while the horsemen believe that his word is good and that he's a politician, he can obviously be bought, War states that the ranks of the chosen have been infected by apathy and that he wants to make sure that the next president of the Union is in fact a true believer in the words of the message. So we see that the Secretary of State also falls victim to War's blade and is left on the floor without a head. As the horsemen continue to make their way through the line of succession, they finally reach one Antonia LaVey, who is the Secretary of the Interior, and she recites the message to them verbatim. And that is when War is finally satisfied that they have found the true believer that they were seeking to become the new president of the Union, as we see Miss LaVey sworn in front of a giant crowd. I would like to question, though, how they plan to explain the death of the majority of the previous administration to the millions of citizens throughout the Union. Like, I mean, you know, the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of the Treasury, the Secretary of State, and a whole host of other people are all now decapitated and nowhere to be found. And apparently they're just going to run with that. On the next page, we once again see a bit of a blurb, this one a portion of the message stating, "Of the three, but not of the third, a lotus, the death and resurrection of love, a cup of a cup, a chalice of a chalice." We then once again see the large 2-page splash of the East of West logo with the title of this issue, above all, few are chosen. This is something else that remains a constant throughout the entire series, and it's something else that I think is a really cool artistic choice to make sure that you have one 2-page splash of the book's title in every single issue. It gives it such a unique feel in terms of storytelling and just a real sense of how epic the entirety of this narrative truly is. Meanwhile, out west at the Golden Bridge, we see a herd of bison grazing in a field, one standing a little bit too far away from the rest of the herd as it is attacked by a snarling wolf, and we then see the character wolf carrying said bison over his shoulders because apparently he is incredibly strong to be able to lift and carry such a large animal, as he walks back to the campsite that he has made with Crow. Later that evening, the two of them are sitting next to the fire roasting the buffalo that has been killed. Crow asks how much longer, and Wolf states it won't be, or that he's close, as we see Death riding up on the campsite on his mechanical steed. And when he gets to the other two, he simply states it is done, in reference to him assassinating the president of the Union. As Death dismounts from his steed, he states that there will be no mistaking what his intent is now that he has killed the president, and that he'll have rattled some cages and that they're going to all be seeing him soon. And Crow then states that there's some luck on that front, as she then tells Death that the list that they were given in the first issue has led her to find the locations of all but one of the individuals that Death is hunting. But Wolf tells Death to make sure that, you know, he takes the time to question the members that he knows the location of about the whereabouts of the last member that he's hunting before killing them so that he can get the information he seeks. However, Crow then states that you can't ask a fire not to burn, and that death is an inferno. And Death then states that They will definitely all die, for he is constant, or he is nothing. We then see the new president of the Union, Miss LeVay, flying as she is just kind of lost in thought, but then interrupted when the captain of the plane she is in, or ship, I should say, states that they are 5 minutes out as they approach armistice. And we see here, again, it's not really a plane, it's not really a jet. This is kind of the super futuristic sci-fi type of technology that exists within this world, as they have, vehicles that shouldn't possibly be able to fly with very full and capable flight abilities. We then see Miss LeVay enter a room inside of the tower at Armistice as she is greeted by the other members of what is a group known as the Chosen, as they don't, necessarily welcome her with open arms. However, she states that she is loyal to all of the same causes and demands that the previous president was. However, one of the women in the room states that this, of course, is obvious because she wouldn't be here were she not. And then the different members all introduce themselves. We start with Ezra Orion, who is the premier of Armistice, or the keeper of the message. We then have Hu from House of Mao, who is the security minister of the People's Republic. We then meet Shiveo, who is apparently the big magic of the Endless Nation. We then meet Andrew Archibald Chamberlain, who is the chief of staff of the Black Towers. We then meet the Crown Prince of the Kingdom of New Orleans, John Freeman, and the governor of the Texas Republic and noted skeptic, Bell Solomon. However, President LeVay seems somewhat confused by Bell Solomon's presence, as he is in fact a noted skeptic, because she states that the horseman implied to her that this was a task only for the faithful and the believers in the message. And Bell Solomon's response is so good, I'm actually going to read it verbatim, which is something I typically don't do when I'm reviewing these books. Well, what you need, Madam President, is perspective. 1 week ago, you were no one, unimportant and insignificant. I, however, have always been and still remain Bell Solomon. The universe, you see, she grades on a curve. This is the kind of dialogue that I love in this book, is just the personality that is given to some of these characters is so just unique and spot on, and the way that the writing is done in this book is just top notch throughout the entirety. However, they are then interrupted by Ezra Orion, who states that they have to move on with the formalities, as he then makes a small cut on his arm, bleeding into the triangle symbol, and then awakening the visual representation, I guess, of the message. It's not truly explained. However, this apparently shows to all of the Chosen the true scope of what the purpose of the message really is. After seeing this, Shiveo asks President LeVay if she now understands what must happen. She states that she believed, but she never imagined, which Hu states is why the message exists in the first place, is to make sure that they are all guided upon the task that they are all working toward. However, Bell Solomon then brings up that the apocrypha of the message is not in any way ambiguous about what it states of the horsemen. And he's then interrupted by Secretary Chamberlain, who states that they all know what he wants, and perhaps they should just cut the cord so that Mr. Bones can get back to business. He then is interrupted by who states that, this is silly, and asks if, he's lost his appetite for the slaughter. However, Secretary Chamberlain states that, he's had blood on his hands since before she was born, and that it was merely a suggestion before he leaves. Uh, Orion then asks Chamberlain, if he's leaving before the feast, and Chamberlain just simply states that he came here when he was called, he met the president, she met him, and now he has to leave to attend other business back at the Black Towers, and bids everyone adieu. We then see an exterior shot of the Black Towers as Secretary Chamberlain returns after his meeting with the Chosen. They're all aware at this point, obviously, that death is coming for each one of them to enact his revenge. We see Secretary Chamberlain disembark from his transport ship and move back to his office, where he opens the door to see none other than Death himself. However, Chamberlain doesn't seem to be too caught off guard by it, as he states it was sooner than expected, but inevitable. Death then states, he likes the sound of that, inevitable, and he is happy to hear that Chamberlain has called him by his name, Death, and that was a big story point in the first issue. Meanwhile, if you haven't watched my video on the first issue, I suggest you do. East of West is one continuous ongoing narrative, and if you don't see all of it or read all of it or watch all the videos, it's easy to get lost in what's happening in the story. It's a difficult story to just jump into. Chamberlain, believing that Death is somewhat impressed by the fact that he is not terrified of his presence, tells him to temper his expectations, as he is a man who is not a gambler or someone that would be considered valiant, but he is a man who deals solely in leverage. Death thinks this is strange, as he doesn't believe that Chamberlain has any leverage in this situation, but Chamberlain assures him that he does. Death then states that there is a thing that he's seen that these people do on Earth, where a man takes his head and sticks it in the mouth of a lion, and that he thinks it's bravery when in actuality he's just being foolish. Chamberlain states that this is rather an ambiguous thing to say, so he responds with his own riddle in kind and asks Death, what does one cat say to the other cat? Death says, I don't know, and Chamberlain responds, meow. He's like, what the hell else would he ever say? Death seems unamused by this, and then tells him that if he has a point, he should make it very soon. Chamberlain then states that he and the other Chosen are all tasked with trying to orchestrate the end of the world, and that they are the ones who came together a decade ago and basically gave up the location of Death to the other three horsemen, and that they consider themselves a conduit to a greater cause. And he then asks Death if Death knows what their guiding principle and motivation is, to which Death obviously responds the message. Interestingly enough, I'd also like to point out that I really like the way that this entire interaction is not only written from a dialogue perspective, but drawn in the fact that we see that no matter what panel Death is in with Chamberlain, he always has his revolver pointed squarely at Chamberlain's head, as he intends to make sure that Chamberlain meets the same fate as the former president of the Union. Chamberlain then states that Death is correct. It is the message. It is Apocrypha predicting the end of the world. But then he asks Death if he can share with him a secret that he has never uttered aloud to anyone else. Death asks him what it is, and Chamberlain responds that he no longer cares. He no longer has any desire to follow the message, as he has a great many things that he has acquired, and he appreciates the real power that he wields, and that he has decided that this world suits him just fine, same way that Death came to this same conclusion. He then proposes that he and Death strike up a partnership. Death immediately rebukes this idea and puts his gun directly under Chamberlain's chin, and states that they will all die. However, Chamberlain reminds Death that while he is hunting all of the people that betrayed him before, all of those same people are also hunting him. And that if he's got the opportunity to take one of the people who would otherwise be his enemy and make them a friend, would that not be more of a benefit to him, especially someone in a position as powerful as one that Chamberlain is in? Death then states that, or Death then asks him if he can get him what he wants. And Chamberlain responds that he can do far better than that, as he recites the same passage of the message that was written in the beginning of the book, of the third, but not of the three, a lotus, the death and resurrection of love, a cup of a cup, a chalice of a chalice. As we see a garden in the western part of the United States, and a woman who is being restrained by four very large individuals as she tends to a bonsai tree and is not being treated as an insignificant threat, despite the fact that she is shackled and completely incapacitated from trying to basically break free of her bindings. Chamberlain then goes on to inform Death that he believes he is only looking for one thing, when in actuality he is searching for two. Death then states for Chamberlain not to toy with him. However, Chamberlain states, but that's of course what friends do. And then informs Death that he thought his wife is dead, but she is not. And then congratulates him because she is in fact alive, as we see that the woman in all of those bindings is in fact Death's wife. And that's where this issue ends, on a rather mysterious note, introducing a character that we had not seen before, and also informing us that Death apparently has a family, and that he thought that the woman he married and loved was dead when she isn't, and that the story is going down a much deeper rabbit hole than we believed it was after reading the first issue. On the last page of the book, we see an advertisement for many of the different image titles that were being published at this time. Some of these books have finished now. Others are still going. There's a lot of different titles in here. If any of them interest you, look into them. Image does a pretty good job of, once their titles finish, putting all of them out into trade paper format. So a lot of times you can still find them in trade papers. And on the reverse inside cover, we see a interview with Mark Millar. For those of you who don't know, Mark Millar is the creator of Kick-Ass and Nemesis and Super Crooks. A lot of cool stuff. I don't have Kick-Ass in single issues, but I do have the first miniseries of Nemesis. I know I have Super Crooks, and I think I also have the first miniseries of Superior. It's a basic interview, kind of a lot of softball questions of just, what do you love about your job? What do you not love about your job? That kind of stuff. But I should point out, I learned one thing very interesting by reading this interview. Mark Millar, for those of you who don't know, is Scottish and was born and raised in Scotland. And at the time he was growing up, he was only able to get the reprints of American comics as they were shipped to the UK at a later date from their original printing. And I was unaware that American comics, when reprinted for the European market, were reprinted in black and white instead of the full color that they were shipped and printed with in the US. And he stated that it actually kind of irritated his older brothers a lot, as he would take these black and white comics and go to color them in himself, and would definitely lead to some heated arguments between him and his older siblings. But I thought that was a cool little thing to learn. I didn't realize that that was the case at the time of him being a child. And maybe it's the case today. If you're watching this and you live in the UK or in another part of Europe, I am interested if all of the American books that you get as reprints on your side of the pond are still printed up in black and white. And that was East of West #2. Once again, I can't say enough good things about this series. I absolutely love this title. It's why I made such a conscious effort to keep up with it as it was being printed initially and have a full run of the series. Admittedly, it starts off in a way that's very cryptic in a lot of ways. It's, creating a lot of questions in the first issue and creates even more in this second issue. And at times it's very mysterious and you don't really know the extent of what's going on in the story. But the difference between good mysterious storytelling and bad mysterious storytelling is that when it's bad, the story is mysterious in a way where you don't care about finding out what's happening. Like you're not that invested in it. And if it's good, you can't wait to find out what's happened. And I feel like that's where East of West sits for me. It was always in that area of like, oh man, I can't wait to see what happens next. I can't wait to get my hands on the next issue and find out where, this plot point is going or where this subplot is going and what happens to these different characters. It's just masterfully written. And like I said, I can't say enough good things about this title. But those are just my opinions. Your opinions may vary. Perhaps you don't like this title at all, but it's okay because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.